Where to start? Well, firstly, thank you for inviting me. It's in these post-COVID, if that's the right phrase, world, it's really nice to give talks to real people. So thanks for the invitation. And I caught myself out when Joe invited me to do this because we had a chat about this discussion, so I came up with that. And then I started putting this together last week and thought, oh, hang on, there's so much. So I was just saying to the gentleman who was sitting next to me in the audience, at one point 2 days ago, I had 105 slides. And it was a real thing of, oh, no, I've got to cut them down. I've only got 3/4 of an hour, 44 minutes now. So I have cut them down. If I have told you too much at the end of this, maybe that's the point. There is so much in this area. So I have given you a sort of selection. I've also put in a couple of little breaks. So if at one of those breaks you think we've had enough, we're going home, just let me know and I won't go any further. Right, so first slide please. You will see me use this before because it tells the point really well. It's a plan of the area, as you may have seen, Dorchester up there, Weymouth there, put together about 10 years ago now, but it really makes its point. I think the colours haven't quite come out perfectly, but it doesn't matter, because what I like to use this for is to show that apart from the square, which is outdated anyway, every blob on there is a scheduled monument. That is archaeological remains of national importance that are legally protected. Lots of people have come up with many other things that they felt were nationally important as well, but those are the ones with the legal protection on them. It's your Christmas quiz if ever you have these things. Spot the monument. 1 point for making capital. 10 points for value stones. And the other thing is, I will talk a bit about round barrows, Bronze Age barrows, and you don't need contours on this map because round barrows are usually on hilltops. So if you want to know where the top of the ridgeway is between Dorchester and Weymouth, follow the barrows. And they sort of divide off around either side of the Bride Valley. I could almost leave that as that's my point. We've got loads, haven't we? But let's go into a bit more detail. I'll try and go through Dorchester first, and then expanding it a bit. Not quite. So, in the sort of order, firstly, it's about how much people take in. I like encouraging people to have a look around when they're going to places. And I suspect a lot of people, well, I know it from taking them on walks, have never seen these. That's just outside Waitrose in Dorchester. So if you're coming out the door of Waitrose and you're going round to the lift, you go past there and there's the potter in that way. Those are interpretation panels and very good for their age, put up in the mid-1980s when the Tudor Arcade development happened on what had been known as Greyhound Yard, the pub that was there. The big archaeological excavation, and those show a sequence of the Neolithic from about 2500 BC, just after Neolithic when this thing went down, and then Roman medieval and more recent. And for its time, that's pretty darn good. What's this? This is extraordinary, in my opinion. Can I have the next slide, please? This is a plan of the area. So, especially in East Street, South Street, that away, Acton Road, there's Waitrose. Beneath Waitrose, well, the archaeologists digging Greyhound Yard knew they were in a medieval town, Roman town, so they dug away, got to the bottom, probably thought they'd nearly finished, and found some enormous holes. Tree holes. They're not post holes, they were where trees were. And you see that there, if it's clear. That's Waitrose, and there's a black thing there. That is that line of posts. And you're not supposed to take people to see them there now, but they are visible in the basement of the car park in Waitrose. For safety reasons, very good safety reasons. People don't want tour parties wandering around when there's cars over the place. But if you're in the basement, you will see a series of red circles. And again, good interpretation for its time, showing where those posts were. No, posts, I'm going to call them, they're tree holes. They're massive. The excavators were advised by this and extrapolated this curve and came to the conclusion that there was a whole, well, a circle that went all the way to Salisbury Field. Then in the 1980s, how can I put this, the first attempt to develop Charles Street, say no more, archaeological trial trenches were dug and they found the same post arrangement with that trench there and that trench there on a slightly different arrangement. So actually it's curving round a bit. It's still stupidly big, but it's not quite as big. And why did people do that 2,500 years ago? My interpretation is they started doing it and they almost couldn't stop. They were showing off. It was the equivalent of a team building exercise. You're a bunch of farmers all desperately trying to make a living. When you get a bit of time, you do something together, which maybe brings a bit of social cohesion. You know, the equivalent of a club like this or something like that. People get together, see each other, work together and think, they're not that bad really, are they? Because look, they're working away as hard as I do. And for a time, between about 3000 and 2000 BC, 4,500 years ago, that seems to be all they did in their spare time in Dorchester. Because there's loads of others, and you keep finding more. So next one, please. Just in case you don't know, Mulberry Rings. I have to mention this because it's quite special. But so it's now, next time you go to Mulberry Rings, have a look round because it's hidden in the town almost. But there is actually something called Allington Bridge, the high ground that you see, for instance, the trees on it, if you're on Maiden Castle and looking in this direction. It goes all the way along that way. And Mulberry Rings is on that bridge. So next one, please. So I took earlier in 1910. I love showing this because it shows the old arrangement of the railway station, how it was originally, but we haven't got time for that tonight. And it's above an amphitheatre, isn't it? Of course it is. But in the 1970s, an archaeologist called Richard Bradley looked again at the excavations that happened on the site in 1910 and realised what the excavators had missed was that underneath those earth banks was another prehistoric monument. Not quite as big as the Roman amphitheatre, but you know, pretty darn sizable. With he thought maybe up to 45 holes, 10 metres deep, dug in a circle inside, with stuff in there. Animal bones, food remains like that, pottery and so forth, maybe gifts to the gods. Why? I don't know. Because we don't have written records, this is prehistory. But you can guess. Offerings to the gods, something like that. Let's find some more. Next one, please. You want this picture? Needs a bit of explanation. That's Max Gate. No, silly. There's Max Gate. There's the bike path. And that's the road out to Wareham. As you go up to Wareham, the Wareham Road, that's the road that goes off towards West Stephenson Crossroad. But also, that's part of that same bridge, Allington Bridge. An archaeologist found barrows, which more later on this area and so forth, but there's two more monuments here. Flagstones and Mount Pleasant. What's the third one? There's something that may be another barrow there, Conker Barrow. And quite a lot of archaeological work has happened on these. They are, let me give you the dates, refer to my notes. Flagstones is actually a bit earlier than most of the rest of them. It's a bit before 3000 BC, so a little over 5,000 years old. And Mount Pleasant is theoretically, dates were from about 2900 to 2500 BC, but with something else from 2000 BC added later. Does it sound complicated? Yes, because it is. So let's have a look at one of them. I can't remember which one it was. It's that one. That's it. That's Mount Pleasant, but it's not quite. In 1970, an archaeologist called Richard, I think it was, certainly Wainwright, Jeffrey Wainwright, that's him, carried out an excavation, finding a large ditch, like circular ditch, with more stupidly big post setting circles. Presumably linked up with other cross pieces, like you got like the Trilithon of Stonehenge, something like that. And everyone looks at this and thinks, he's excavated the whole site. I'm just trying to pick out, in some of these you can see people, I think they're just there. So that gives you an idea of scale. They're about people size if they're not. But could we just go back? Because you think, he excavated that, didn't he? No, he didn't. He excavated that little green thing there. That's the bit that was added in about 2000 BC, added later on. He did some other trenches elsewhere. But that thing that looks quite massive, that thing is, go back again, that thing. Is it when I go near?
It's not touchscreen.
That's the circle. The little circle in there. Next one, Netflix. That's that other little circle. Just to show you I'm not making it up. Again, massive, stupidly massive. That's all. And this is flagstone. Now, when Thomas Hardy was constructing Max Gate, he found, I think, some prehistoric burials and one of sarsen stone, so forth. If anyone knows where I live, there's a sarsen stone outside my house. And I've got a vague feeling that my house was built about the same time, and it's one of the ones that was dumped by the builders there. They wanted to get rid of it. And someone else said, well, put it outside where Steve Wallis is going to live one day to protect it from traffic. I'm very happy about it. Hardy was a great advocate of archaeology, and it should all be recorded, except for my house. It didn't do much. However, when the bypass was being built next door in the 1980s, Washington Archaeology did a major excavation and found this other enclosure here, which is particularly early, so before 3000 BC. But can you see, there's all sorts of odd things going on. They found stones in there, so sarsen stones that might have come from west of Dorchester, but I wonder if there was some like Thornton wood that were knocking around then and have since all gone, something like that. But also they dug a series of ditches. They didn't dig a ditch all round, they dug almost like a series of pits in a line. And hopefully the next slide will make that point for you. Just like Cheatham. This is not Dorchester area, unless you've been very generous. This is on a pipeline excavation a few years ago west of Bear Regis. But I want to show this because this is something that might be a burial mound or some other prehistoric monument, but it's dug in the same way. Because the archaeologists have dug out the fill of all those individual features. And instead of having what we would normally think of as a ditch surrounding something all the way round, it's more like a series of pits of varying sizes in a circle. And I am not a great prehistoric expert, but I look at that, and you can look at that and come up with your own views. But my view in that is, what mattered was the digging. It was that a group of people got together and marked out that area. And I think that was either one person or one family. So it's almost like you folks decided to make the Dorchester Civic Society Memorial, popped down the Feather Gardens with your shovels, and thought, we're going to do that. We will all stand in a rough circle and dig until sunset, or the pub's open, one or the other. And then when you've finished, that will do, because you've done it together and you've marked out that area. And that's what you see, like some of the earlier monuments. They're not that desperately keen to make it like we would think, same depth and even all around. It's almost like it's the digging that matters. And then something. Another one of my favourite maps because it shows so much of Dorchester, the Roman banks, and I want to mention later on. I found out what might be some new information for you on them. List of buildings are shown there as triangles. People think that Dorchester start that again. Dorchester, until the 1850s, was much smaller than the Roman town. The red line marks the extent of the Roman town, or as it was after 100 years or so. And those triangles are listed buildings, so they tell you roughly where the older parts of the town were 200 years ago. So, and they're far from a big man of prison. They're basically on a T-shape. There'll be big open areas that were undeveloped. which is why the Roman baths survived quite well, and why the Roman townhouse survived really well on the grounds of County Hall, because that was the parkland of Colleton House. So Dorchester was quite a small place until quite recently. Next one, please. Again, something that a lot of people probably see, fountain in Princess Street, now near the entrance to the old County Hospital site, obviously now moved. Looks quite nice, very pleasant. And I often have to tell people what it is, and they don't know. But this is the spot where the archaeologist Bill Putnam, who did an awful lot of work on Dorchester's Roman aqueduct, roughly reckoned that the aqueduct stopped. So that aqueduct, first of all, it's extraordinary in that we're now into the Roman period. The Roman army gets to Britain, got the hang of attacking other people's countries, and knows that it's not simply about killing people, it's about control, making them want to be Romans so that they pay taxes, and the Roman army can go off and conquer some other place so. So they want people to be Roman, so they're trying to show off to people, you want to be like us, and you certainly don't want to be against us because we're so well organised militarily. But I think the aqueduct was part of that. They are showing off water. Look, we've got running water. But the magic to local people, I think, is that they made water run on a chalk hill. Next one, please. How did they do that? Very careful engineering work. Why is it magic? Well, chalk is permeable. If you dig a hole in chalk, I think that would be my pond, you forget it because the water's going to go through the chalk, you have to line it. So what the Roman army does is construct, well, this is sort of the replacement, but it gives you a very good idea, a terrace with a slope of 1 in 1750 all the way from, it keeps varying, either a dam just opposite Frampton, so a good 5 miles away, or maybe further up the Froome Valley, depending on the latest thinking, but nevertheless it survives really well in places like here at Sinton-Townbury Camp. And what they're doing is they are getting the right line from 2 goes, Bill Putnam thinks, and then digging a channel, lining it with clay, and letting running water go through it. The problem with it is that if you want to avoid, how can we put this, the local population expressing their views in a full and forthright way, Centurion, what's that floating in my bathwater? You've got to cover it over. And it also stops the sheep doing the same sort of thing. That then makes it very difficult to see leaks. So it's a really good show thing, but it probably doesn't work very well in the long term. So it may be only used for 100 years. And then it will be. But Bill Putnam thought it started up here opposite Frampton. And what I've got on this, some of the red bits are how it fits to survive and still needs protected. But it goes in and out of all these little side coons there. And my photo was taken from Townbury Camp there, so we had to go all the way around like that to get there. And it's an extraordinary piece of work. And it's also probably a good thing for the Roman army who've got soldiers to keep quiet and busy, give them that to do, as well as setting out the town and building the road network and fighting. So there's the walks. Again, I'm sure a lot of you know this, but I just like saying it again. To me, the walks are clear proof that Dorchester 300 years ago was not full of people who could just about grow their own turnips, which is the impression you get sometimes when you read some novels and so forth. These were people who were really well up with the latest ideas. The Roman town had 3 sets of banks and ditches around it from about the year 200. So after it had been in existence for over a century, it decides to build these things, and they are massive. And by the time about 1700, the town realises that it doesn't need these defences anymore because artillery's got much better. They're not sure what to do, so they have this great idea of flattening them out mostly and constructing these boulevards in the latest continental fashion. So our predecessors in Dorchester 300 years ago were not, chewing bits of straw and so forth. They were in great contact with the rest of Europe. And as proof courtesy of Peter Bellamy, this is the first excavation that took place a few years ago when the tennis court and the bottom of the gardens was being laid out on the old bowling alley. We conveniently located archaeologists. The photographer is standing on the walks, which is on the inner bank of those defences, and it's a bit knocked up by other service trenches and so forth, but Claire Randall there is standing at the beginning of the first ditch, that ditch ends there, and then Kirsty and Peter Cleaver there are standing in the second ditch, the bank between's gone. The third ditch was in that other trench. And if any of you remember the Gardens house a few years ago, collapsed a bit, some of the walls needed some repairs. I don't know if you saw that. Lots of archaeologists locally were saying, we know what that is. They thought they built it on solid chalk, but it may be that they'd actually built it on the fill, the infill of the outer ditch, which was a bit weak, that hence the building collapsing with. A bit more nearer the time for you, in terms of work. This is what the Roman army was doing. It was doing the aqueducts and so forth, but it was also laying out the town. So the Roman army probably gets to this area and builds a fort. I think, not just me, not suppose, that it's in the northwest corner of the town. So we may be just about within the area of the Roman fort. So let's try and explain that later if you're interested. But what he's doing is laying out the town. It's not actually building all the houses, but he's laying the plots out and he's putting in the infrastructure. And this section of road found when the county museum was being extended or beforehand, and you may have seen it because there were open areas for people to come and visit the excavation, is just one of the many roads in Dorchester. It's not even a main one, and yet it's got about half a metre of partly packed flint all the way along it on that chalk base. That seems to me like Roman soldiers following the manual. This is what it says we've got to do, this is what we're going to do, lads, off we go. That sort of thing. So what's the Roman army doing? It's building a town so that people like its own veterans, like the chap called Battus, whose tombstone is on display in the museum and was found later, could live here, and local people and traders and what could live here as well and found the town. I've got to say this because it pays my wages. The Roman townhouse. This, hopefully a lot of you have seen it, but this is something we have done up quite recently. We got county council, we got heritage lottery funding and lots of other partners, town council, museum and others working on this. This is the 1930s excavation. The Roman townhouse. I love this. Another good picture that tells the story. In the very far corner is Colleton House. This was Colleton Park. This is the 1930s excavation. I think this might mean something like August Bank Holiday 1937. I won't bore you why I think that. Of the start of the excavation of the Roman townhouse. Those people are standing on the original ground surface. The archaeologists, to get to that bit of wall, had to take off about, that much soil, if that. It was not deeply buried. So now when you go to the townhouse and you see all the problems we're having because it's in a dirty grey hole with tarmac around it, water running off, actually, then it was under a very shallow soil. And it's only because Dorchester had not expanded to fill the whole Roman defences, you've got a really well preserved building like that without more recent cellars cutting through it and all sorts of other things. So that was the Roman townhouse of, about 4 years ago, when we had the latest go at doing it up again. All sorts of problems, it's in a big hole. Those trees look good, but they're causing shading and so forth, and antisocial behaviour. The building, that cover building put over there in the 90s is showing its age. Accessibility is a real problem. People find it difficult to get to, etc., etc. So we had another go. Oh yeah, antisocial behaviour. That made just like a plastic bottle, I think it's a bomb. Because people were taking drugs and so forth. And that's the roof of the cover building with all sorts of moss growing on it. That's just two of the issues. Before you senseless, you've got to come. So off we go, get the money, good old Heritage Lottery Fund. So if you bought a lottery ticket in about 2018, 2019, thank you. That's when your money went to. We're using archaeological track company, Context One Archaeological Services, to dig out the new entrance ramp. We knocked the walls around County Hall are listed, they're about 300 years old, because they're the walls of Croydon Park. But we found a gateway that had been blocked up in the 1950s when County Hall was being built, so it was knocked through, and then we put in the entrance ramp that cuts through the Roman rampart, hence the archaeological excavation there. New paths, access routes and so forth. That surface may have to change, but we had a good go with it there. Next one, please. Those trees were cut down, but lots of good planting instead. That is going in March 2021. Next one, please. New seating area, caused a lot of controversy at the time, particularly when Claire was making it, left the site for a month or two to let some concrete dry out, and people said, "What have you done, you idiot?" And we had to say, "Hang on a minute, she hasn't let it dry out yet. We come back and paint it." And so you might argue, and I myself, to be honest, that that's amphitheatre style seating is not what you normally expect on a domestic site. It does mean a lot of people use the site, want to come there and care about it, which is what I think we need for monuments on display. Conservators doing a really good clean-up of mosaics and so forth inside, but we're always going to have problems with that because it's in a big hole and it's always going to flood to some degree. And that's where it looks like a slightly different colour when we just about finished. In fact, that was this summer with lots of planting, but also, planting and so forth, new seating area over there, just to make it a nice place. And next one, just to prove the point, wildflowers and bees. That's what we wanted. Job done in that sense. It's a nice place to go to. Right. When Gareth Jones became mayor about May last year, he said to me, "People keep saying they want to get the Roman baths exposed again. Can you find out any more?" So I went off to Historic England, had a chat with one of their science advisors and the local inspector, and didn't find out much. One thing I learned then was that, I don't know if you know this, but when the baths were found, and this complex building was found in 1977 to 78, there was one open day in 1978, as far as I understand it, where lots of local people went to see it, and there are still people who are annoyed that it was covered over and it's not on display. So, what was decided at the time, because there weren't resources to put it on display, was to protect it. The archaeologists who did the digging deliberately didn't go into these structures so forth. They just did, in many cases, just went down enough to understand what was there. So they didn't really get a full understanding of the whole business. But they got a fair idea, because always they were aware that it was going to be preserved. But the way they preserved it was something that in the 1970s was really top-notch again. They used something called terra, geotechnical membrane. When you see it, it looks like sort of plastic sheet. It's not very special, but it supposedly protects itself. Put that all over it, well done. Cover that in sand, well done again. And then soil and so forth, and built a car park. Now Wallis Fields car park. You folks asked me to do this talk, and I thought, I'll use that as an excuse. Someone was bound to ask me about the Roman baths. So I went back, chased again. Thanks to Sasha Chapman, the local inspector, who put me in contact with the right people, I got some more useful information. So I'm going to try and share this with you, being aware that there's limited time. So first of all, I mentioned to them that we'd heard that Terram, that's what I found out in 2021. The Terram they put down, at the time they thought would protect the archaeology, but more recent work has shown that it tends to stick to things like mosaics and so forth, which, isn't good. So I'd asked a person who's called Nicola Hembury, who's an archaeological excavation principal at Historic England, about Terram. And she says to me in response, as you say, there are concerns not just that Terram can stick to remains, especially mosaics, but also that it can wick moisture and encourage mold growth. I take wick means that it draws it up. So in the case of our recent bill of excavation with areas we have rewritten our backfilling methodology to basically only use terra at the end, and she's even wary about using sand. So this is buried still. They did their very best, but it's got terra over it, which is not good. So if anyone is ever in the future thinking of re-exposing that, they would need to, I think, find out first of all what damage the terra has done, the stuff that was supposed to protect it.
Does terra have a lot of that?
That's a good question. They didn't say anything defective other than I've not heard anything otherwise. So the way they talk about it, I'm assuming they're thinking it's sort of still okay but damaging. I don't know if any of you were on the Dorchester Heritage Committee in 2001, but I gave a talk then where I promised that within a year those excavations would be written up, because that's what someone at Historic England told me on it ago. However, I have been told, well, first of all, there was the archaeologist who did the work, David Batchelor, prepared a report that was not published, but it was available. A chap called Pete Wilson did a redraft. That we've got that report in our records, in the historic environment record. But what Nicola and one of her colleagues sent me is another report by a chap called John Magilton, written sometime in the early 2000s, where he reinterprets the stuff. They're a bit wary about me sending it to everyone, otherwise I would have emailed it out beforehand. But it might be acceptable at some point, I hope. But what they also say is they brought Pete Wilson back. Early last year, 2021, we commissioned Pete Wilson to publish the site. So it's possible, and I've said this once 20 years ago, but I'm saying it again, there is a chance that this will be republished. And that report by John Magilton is quite interesting in that it does tell good stuff about the site. The complex started maybe a bit earlier than we thought. We used to think the Roman town started about the year 70. Well, this may have passed from the pottery dating. The building may have started a bit earlier, in the 60s. And then there's that looks very complex. In fact, that's because there was all sorts of series of rebuilds as it changed. And then in about the 4th century, so the 300s, 4th century AD, it goes out of use as a bathhouse, but people were still living there, as with our Roman townhouse, I think. It's just not quite as what the Romans call civilized today. So, I don't know, that's a bit more for you, I hope. Yeah. Sorry, I should have said that. I'm used to doing that. First of all, for a scale, the person at the top, they're walking like that. Does that help? Oh, yeah. Oh. I can now. One bit. Yeah. So I'm good. Yeah, you got it. That's it. There. Does that give you? Sorry, I should have said that. Does that give you an idea of scale? And you've got to sit. I think it's. Do I know the exact detail? No, I don't. It took me long enough to work out where North was on this. I think it's behind. And it's taken, I think, from a photographic tower, or maybe like used to be done. Someone in the bucket of a JCB that's gone up, which is highly illegal now, but I know it's been done. But they're looking down from behind Wollaston House, I think. And you have quite a complex area, but you've got the different types of buildings. So you have underfloor heating. So whereas in the Roman townhouse we have solid stone with channels into it, they have pili, which are columns, tiles that support the floor. So those are heated rooms. That, I think, is a plunge pool. Okay? Beyond that, I don't know. Because having read this report I've got from John Magilton doesn't have any plans with it. So hopefully they've not been drawn up yet and it'll make more sense. Another thing that concerns me, he talks about, a little disparagingly, about the standards of recording, and I get the horrible feeling it might be difficult to work out exactly how deeply buried it is. That's one thing you want to know for a start, to make sense of it all. What you normally do now is, you draw the sections of your trenches, which gives you an idea of depth. It's a scale drawing. I'm not quite sure if that was done. But hopefully, in a year or two's time, there will be a more detailed report that, can give everyone an idea of what's involved. And whenever people said to me over the years, why aren't people re-exposing Dorchester to whereabouts? One of the answers, first of all, it's a car park, so there's lots of issues there. But the other was we didn't understand it. Well, hopefully, when this is brought out, it could be understood better, and informed decisions made, like is it a good idea or not? Okay, right. Sorry, enough about that. I've got my thoughts on that. So I want to let you know that there is other stuff going on regularly in the area. St George's Road, down the far end, excavation by AC Archaeology, and a phased excavation ahead of that development there, sort of north of Blackgate, effectively. This is standing on the spot of these. All these, excavating on chalk for archaeologists is so easy. That's why so many archaeologists started their careers in this part of the world. Because all you do is take the soil off, and it's black and white, and if it's white, stop. If it's not, keep digging. Field system, all sorts of things like that. It is that easy, honestly. Not that I do it in that area, you probably can't quite see a little farmstead. And that and the work on the other side, the bypass, is going to fit in really nicely with excavations as well that were undertaken on the adjacent part of the bypass when that was being constructed. So, a nice bit of landscape work there. And the star find, next one please. Roman coin of, not a Roman coin, silver coin of Cornwall. King of Mercia, 796 to 821. Just one of the coins. Next one please. Blank. That's good. That's my first break. So what I'd like to try and do is show you some stuff about the wider area, and if there's then time, one of the things I was asked was to talk about the future of archaeology and so forth. And one of the things to me that's important is how you communicate it. So I'll try and do as much of that as possible. Shall I try and just rush through it? Okay. Right. There is a lot of stuff visible in this area that is so special. The museum is organising an event for cruise ship operators on Thursday to encourage people, cruise ship operators, not to put people on coaches and things to Stonehenge, but come out here, what we've got. Long Barrow, prehistoric burial mound, grey menhir cults. Difficult to see, but it's a prominent location on a hilltop, great place to go and look at. Communal burial, that's how the first farmers buried their dead together. They're all farmers, they're all lived together in life and in death. Similar to Morby Rings, a sacred space, as archaeologists call them, marking out a place as special. The area between Dorchester and Weymouth and off to one side of it, generally called the South Dorset Ridgeway these days, has got 3 of the 4 surviving stone circles in Dorset, including this lovely one, the 9 stones, just west of Winterbourne Abbas. That's the road to Bridport. You might see it very quickly. It used to be possible to park nearby, it isn't at the moment. But it's steam I mentioned. Why is it there? Well, there's a river there. Maybe it's to do with the River Winterbourne, South Winterbourne, maybe that's why it's there. Making that special. Barrows. About 2000 BC, well, a bit earlier, a few hundred years before that, the Bronze Age starts. People start thinking, well, chuck away this stone, we've got this new metal. Actually, it may be that a whole group of new people came into this country, as recent genetic work has shown. And instead of burying their dead together, they get quite egotistical and they bury their dead individually. And I would always say to people, and some of you have been on my walks going on about barrows and working out where they are in the landscape and so forth, it's great fun. Everyone thinks they're on the hilltops, often they're not. They're on the sort of false crests, overlooking little valleys and so forth. So I think that tells you where the people who buried them were still living, because they could then look up their ancestor on a hill above them to protect them. But then they became family plots and other people were buried in them. We know a lot about them because archaeologists damaged them. Culliford Tree Barrow, one of the most famous ones, on the ridgeway between Dorchester and Weymouth. Why have we got a road in Dorchester called Culliford Road? I think it's because it went to Culliford Tree Barrow, which was where the local 100 met in Saxon and more recent times. So barrows were reused for burial in Roman times, sort of Saxon times, but people still used them as a special place to meet. And most all these barrows on the hill got one had a tree on it, got loads there, but probably not there. And I think that's why they chose that one, because it was an easy place for people from several parishes to get together and meet. We've also got the rare survival. We didn't used to be built before modern agricultural ditches, where you get these ghost patterns of fields, often from the Bronze Age. This is the Valley of Stones, Hardy Monument. People were ploughing on sloping land. As they did so, the soil slipped, built up against either hedges or stone walls that divided the fields up. When those fields go out of use, people take the stone away, cut the hedges down or whatever, but you still get those banks. So you get the ghost impressions of field systems from prehistory. People didn't take much notice of them in the past because there were loads of them. It's like with wildlife, when you start losing them, you start caring. And now I think people recognise more the value of these ditches, which are from the very earliest times when, about 1500 BC in the Bronze Age, when people started dividing land into fields. Then in the Iron Age, they built hill forts, making cattle. People wonder how to describe it. It's often described as the best Iron Age hill fort in Britain, and it's only a mile away. And we live near it. Other stuff in the area, Roman roads, they show really well. One of my favourite places is Thornton Wood Country Park, where because our countryside service at Dorchester Council clear it regularly, people like me and the ranger there, Claire Flatton, we do it in the morning in January, can lead guided walks with people. And it's well worth seeing because you see it going straight up a hill, and when you get near the hilltop, you are walking on gravel that was probably put there in Rome. I've just got to show them more modern stuff. You know, just an example of Type Barn at Abbotsbury. Next one, please. Oh, and by the way, we've got fantastic water meadow systems around Dorchester as well. That picture I took hanging out on an aeroplane is flooding in February 1997. You wonder where it is. That's the bypass. That's the tip. Sewage Road. Central Church is that way. But because it was flooding, those things that people normally don't take much notice of showed up really well because the water was in the channels. Archaeology, got to show you this. Again, something I would rabbit on about, my heart was content, was the wonderful archaeology done on the Wayne Relief Road, about 2008-2009. So that's the slice with a barrow under excavation there that was dug across the ridgeway. Our great find was the next one, please. The 50 beheaded Vikings. But why do we put things in museums so people can study them? There was a talk this summer as part of the Hill Forts Painted project where someone re-examined them and found that these Vikings are real. I've been telling you when their heads cut off, that's how they died, wasn't it? He's got evidence that actually it may be that they had their throats cut first, because a few of them have got notches, cuts in the bone at the back. And when you cut someone's throat, in a few cases, the cut goes back to the bone. So if you've got a few of those with those cuts visible, it may be that they actually had their throats cut before. So we're finding out new information all the time through research. Oh, and by the way, a really well preserved Iron Age village with walls and stuff at a place called Southdown Ridge near Upway Station. That'll never happen again, I thought. What a great shame. And then National Grid thinks, hang on a minute, let's get rid of them pylons, which no one wants. Spend $500 million on sticking the wires underground. And archaeologists say, great, well, I did say, go ahead. Those are archaeologists. Oxford Archaeology excavated on that pipeline in early, probably July 2020. The archaeological work started in 2019 and finished about 2021. And any month now, allegedly, some of those pylons are going to come down. That they have done yet. But they needed a really big working easement because they had to put those wires underground and widely stretched. So what did the archaeologists find? What the stuff? Next one, please. Barrow under excavation. The barrow's been flattened, but archaeologists digging the section through the survival of the ditch that was around it, that was the quarry that they piped up to make the barrow mound. Next one, please. On the top of the ridgeway itself, on the south-facing slope, we're looking down towards Weymouth with the cruise ships in the harbour and Portland, a really well-preserved little Roman farming settlement. Next one, please. For instance, with corn drying ovens and so forth, all surviving below ground. Next one, please. Elsewhere, on the next ridge over, which was I want you to go back. A post-Roman, so about 600-700 AD, cemetery on a hilltop with burials. Then this one in a kist setting. Kist being where you dig a hole and you line it with stone. And one of my very favourite things, you think, why that? They're digging a long barrow, one of these early prehistoric monuments, Neolithic monuments, because it's in the way. That's a hand shovel back, yay big. Okay, that, I loved it. I was there when that was being first found. I took my photo. That's a tine. One of the pointy bits on a stag downfield. How do you dig in chalk when you haven't got metal tools? One of the things we always say is they use ankle picks. I think that's the bottom of the ditch. I think someone whacked that in growth. They thought, oh, that'll do. Left that behind and went away and stopped digging. But to me, that's a moment in prehistory. Maybe getting a bit too many, but it could be. If you want to know more, I'll put this up later or whatever if you like. But I would just say there are 3 webinars online that were all done last summer. Watch out, the prehistoric one introduced by me. But if you just Google Dorset VIP scheme, archaeology, you should still be able to get them. There's 3 webinars by the archaeologists who run the project explaining 3 different periods of the excavation. But you want to say, how does archaeology continue and so forth? I'm not quite sure, but archaeology is a massive industry. There's lots of digs going on. We all think everything should be dug up and so forth. And what we need to catch up on, I think, is telling people about it. And I hope this is a good example. Sorry. Dorset Council owns land and so forth up for redevelopment. North Quay there, Weymouth Bowl site. And I was involved in discussions, but I haven't done the majority of the work by a long way. The council wanted to do what we normally do, some trial trenching to work out what's present on the site ahead of development. Got Context One Archaeological Services along, who are quite a small company, but they're very good at presenting their information and also communicating with people. So when they did a series of trenches in where we decided to put them around in that car park, they also started talking to local people who were interested in archaeology, who initially were quite anti the council because of what was being done. Next one, please. This is the result. That group, including a chap called Mark Bryan, who was one of the leaders of that group, got a lot of respect for him. What does he want in life? He cares about the archaeology history of his town and he wants to know more. The Context One were able to involve lots of local people, not only in the excavation, but doing things like fending off other people who wanted to know what's going on and answering all the questions so they could get on with the work. And why do we do these trial trenches? Well, when I saw this site, if someone said to me, what archaeology do you expect to survive from historic Weymouth? I would have said not much, because it's been flattened out and it's got tarmac on it. But actually, in the 1970s, when they did the research, it was pretty clear that all they've done is just level it a bit and stick some tarmac on it. So there are really well preserved remains of buildings under there. And Context One is so good at doing this stuff, doing the research and working with local people to get the stuff, that when they were, almost as they were digging, they were interpreting it. This trench here, that one, they could say that wall there, I think they're marking in red, that wall there, that one, and so forth. Next one, please. And this is the Weymouth Bowl site. And this was my contribution, bringing a load of planning officers down. Because every side sees planners as the enemy. They're not. They're people who are trying their best to do a good job and get something that everyone's happy with. You can disagree with that later. But to me, it's about explaining why we're doing archaeology. So I arranged a site visit for a load of my planning office colleagues to understand why people like me are banging on about archaeology all the time. And that's Richard McConnell, who runs the company and he's researched at Tara. And what was so impressive was while we were looking at these 2 trenches, as they were digging them, they were saying that wall belongs to that, belongs to that. That's the rear wall of the Theatre Royal, and so forth. Just little walls in the site. And the way they present the evidence, the other trench, Cheryl, one of the other mainstays of the site, by a medieval well, in quite a small trench. Next one, please. really well presented information. You can't read that, but that says medieval well, because they present it really well. But then they do 3D stuff that is way beyond me, technically. Cut away. So what is actually a solid trace is almost like he's taken away that whole face of the trench. So you've got a section through that. They stuck a camera down on a stick or a rope or something, and then sort of rectified it, which make it all the same scale, I think. And we live in Dorset, and it's great, and we still get out and enjoy it more. And that's also what's part of my job, I think, an important part of doing that. So that's me doing one of the best things I could ever do in my life, which is leading a guided walk on Egan Hill on a summer's evening. If you live in Dorset and you have not seen the sunset from Egerton Hill, you have missed out. You're not allowed to move out of the county or die until you've seen it, in my opinion. Completely. And then, what local people do, look at the technology. I love this. Walsby Camp. This isn't Dorchester, it's the middle of the county, but I don't care, I'm going to show it you. This is just someone with a drone taking photographs of this little isolated hill fort, which even with the colour not being quite perfect, just shows you how good it can look. I like this so much, I'm going to show you another picture, in the other direction. And this was taken by my contact, a chap called Brian Phillips from the Milton Abbas Historic Society, and he says, you can use these, Steve, in your presentations as long as you advertise it. I think that's my last slide. Oh, no.
Thank you very much for a fascinating talk, which will encourage us all to get out and look at some of these monuments. We have got some time for some quick questions. Felicity, my friend.
If and when the
I'll repeat the question.
if and when the report on the Wilson Farms is forthcoming, how might you do more about it?
The question was, if and when it's a fair way of putting it, if and when the report on the Wollaston Baths is available, when will we get to know about it? I would hope it will be publicised by Historic England in a glare of publicity, make a big blare of it. I'll make a semi-promise to you that if I still know any of you folks and I see a copy, I'll let you know when I see you in the street, if that's a fair response.
Any further questions? Linda, for example? I'm sure it provokes thoughts and looking at some of these questions. No? Sure.
Yeah. Just wondering, when you talk about communication and involvement of people.
Yeah.
I was wondering what can civil society do to assist technology and other interpretation of Dorchester around it?
Lots, but it's also quite an issue, so I'll come. That Weymouth example is a bit of an exception, firstly, because it's the county council who's got the time, and its remit is to be, help people and understand things. So it was possible to do that, and it worked really well. A lot of excavations are done commercially, so the idea is, people are saying quite rightly, we're operating commercially, we pay the archaeologists to do the recording you tell us to do, but we're not going to do any more. Someone like me will make a point of saying, yeah, but actually, if you're paying for good archaeology and you're doing it properly, boast about it. I can think of several examples where local people have been unhappy about development. I've actually had a chat with people, with the archaeologists and so forth, and their attitudes have changed. But also there are safety reasons why the only people on the site who can work there can work there, because you've got machinery going down and all sorts of things like that. So it's not that easy anymore. But you can do work, so most companies will or should involve people like volunteers to a degree. Whether you could expect a major development in Dorchester to be done by volunteers again, I don't know, because the cost of the post-excavation, the writing up and such, it's done commercially, and everyone thinks archaeologists should be paid a wage, so it's done that way. How many other ways? There are so many ways. I used to do this with the Dorchester Association. It was often a good conduit to be able to tell people when things were happening. So I don't know if the ladies remember, we used to be able to do site visits to the Dorchester Association, because often developers didn't want open days, but they would let a smaller group who were interested go along. So that's in there. I'm trying to remember for them and being associated and you both. But you can also, other ways, you can get involved, not just in the digging, but museums and so forth. And there are surveys that are being done. But is it a failing? Possibly. Archaeology is very successful. It's big business. Everything needs to be done, doesn't it? I'm not sure. I don't mind admitting that. And should we do more to involve people and local people be involved? Yeah. Which is why when you said didn't come to the talk, I enjoy doing it anyway. But it's also a duty. And I think you would also find, if you want speakers, AC Archaeology on that site at St George's Road when it's finished, and John Boothroyd of Oxford Archaeology, he gave a talk at the Hilltop Ended thing. But I would say, go to archaeological companies who are doing work locally and say, give us a talk. And a lot of some moan about it, but most, appreciate they should be doing it. Sorry, there's so many things to discuss. I don't know if that's a start.
We've got a question online from Mark. Go ahead, Mark.
Hello, yes, can you hear me okay?
Let's go ahead.
Yeah, lovely, thank you. Thank you, Steve, for an excellent presentation and talk this evening. I was just thinking about your last comment there. It would be fantastic to get sort of schools involved as well in archaeology in the town, and to really celebrate our archaeology and how we could move things forward with that, with liaising with the local schools and really getting them involved. I remember when I was a student at Hardy's, and they had unfortunately just demolished Charles Street for the MEPC development, which obviously never happened. But they got us involved because I was studying classics, and they got us involved in digging, basically, and doing some archaeology. And I just wondered what your thoughts were on that. Thank you.
In terms of the school kids digging, you probably wouldn't want a whole class doing that now for the safety reasons, but contracting companies do take on often sixth formers or something who are interested in an archaeological career. And actually, that's another problem in archaeology in recent years. Companies often just took on people who were qualified and had experience. How do you get that experience? You couldn't. There's now a shortage of staff and they're taking on people more. Doing stuff is absolutely right. Just to show off, last week I took a class from St Nicholas and St Margaret's School in Weymouth around Tour of Rome and Dorchester, and the week before that I gave a talk in a class at Prince of Wales School. But that's me showing off, because a few weeks before that I hadn't done any. But I like showing that sort of thing, and you do get projects that involve that. I've seen a couple of ones in the council, including one linked to the South Dorset Bridgeway. It becomes more difficult. What you find is that, whether it's archaeology or something else, an organisation brings someone on as part of a bigger project to liaise with schools, and that person goes round to all the local schools, and a lot of them say, great idea, lovely, but we're so tight with the national curriculum, what we've got to do, we can't get involved. And I won't name names, but I know two people one who gave up, and one who gave up because they just frustration. There were some they could work with. Those two schools I mentioned, though, were ones that I got linked with because organisers of the old South Dorset Ridgeway project wanted to had an access to experts programme, or access to experts and Steve programme, more accurately, where people like me would go and talk to teachers and so forth. So I think that's a great idea. It's just sometimes a problem for schools if we've got something else to do. Right, the question was about the Vikings. Where are they? They're down the road in the County Museum store, but some of them on display. There's a display cabinet with some stuff in there. So that's where they are. Were they covered over? No, because the road was going to go through them. should that have happened, there's the thing about reburial and respect and so forth. So archaeologists now shouldn't dig things up for the sake of it, it's only because it can be destroyed by development. And that in itself is quite an interesting argument in that case, because I think if you say, well, you should bury them with the same respect as they were buried originally, well then we should go and find an old quarry hole and chuck them in. Yeah, I'm sorry to sound disrespectful, but that's the way it was. What were you about? Were you asking about the cuts, something or that?
Thanks very much, Steve. At the lecture at the New Year, Susan Breeden, who was the PhD research on the Roman languages, she was talking about our policy. She said that to allow the Parliament to continue to plough that land, it was tantamount to allow them down in the environment and Stonehenge itself. I'm sure you know that Lord Fuller owns part of the site. I don't know who owns the other half of the site. But I just wonder what your thoughts are on that continued power in such an important site.
Question as usual. Yes, it is the case that important remains are destroyed by ploughing, and not just here across the whole county. And I also know I've been told from the people who are making efforts can't anymore, to try and stop that happening. But yes, it is the case that ploughing destroys archaeology. As far as that, that continues. I mean, what's that thing to say? I mean, the other side to that is that why have people like me got jobs as archaeologists? Maybe because as a society we've got so good at food production, and that's obviously the irony of it. We've got so good at food production that we've got a surplus to afford to pay these flipping archaeologists a job to look after what's left after the. So yeah, I don't know. I can't think of anything to say than that, but there is a point. There is very important archaeology there, and not just there that it's being ploughed on. I mean, the legal protection. You think something's a scheduled monument, therefore it must be protected. But of course, anything that happened in the 5 years beforehand, before the scheduling, can continue. So we used to get complaints every year from people who about barrows being ploughed up on the ridgeway, and that was because I, as an archaeologist, you couldn't go along with the trowel and put that in the ground without legal protection, but a farmer was perfectly entitled to plough that. So the legislation has tightened. The scheduling used to be so that archaeologists could have a bit of a dig round before they developed it, whereas now it's a lot tighter. And things like countryside stewardships or government and others attempts to strengthen that sort of thing. But it still happens, it probably always will. And another thing about archaeology, we don't know what's important. So sometimes we think that's a blank field, they can plough what they want. That's when you've got 50-headed Vikings or something like that.
I think we're going to have to call it today. And really, thank you, Steve, for such an interesting talk and interesting answers to the questions. And I think it encourages us at least to have another archaeological talk next season, and perhaps do this as a permanent feature, keep you all aware of what's going on. So if we could just show how much we appreciate you in the traditional way.